An apocalyptic vision revealed on government-run television in North Korea.
The video played at the end of a musical performance in the capital, Pyongyang. The fictional missiles strike an unknown city on the U.S. coast. An orchestra plays while the U.S. flag is engulfed in flames. Pyongyang increased its threats after the U.S. sent a number of naval ships toward the Korean peninsula.
China's foreign ministry has expressed serious concern over its ally North Korea's warning of further missile tests and the eventual possibility of nuclear war. His comments come amid differing reports about the trajectory of a US strike group in the region. US President Donald Trump's claims that it had been heading to the Korean peninsula were initially dismissed, then later confirmed.
Instead of continuing in one direction, as she pulled out of Singapore, she's going to continue part of her cruise down in that region, but she was on her way up to Korea.
Tensions between Washington and Pyongyang have seen a recent upsurge, with US Vice President Mike Pence describing North Korea as the most dangerous and urgent threat to peace and security in the Asia-Pacific.
U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says the United States is looking into the possibility of redesignating North Korea as a terror state. Tillerson told reporters at a news conference on Wednesday that the United States was reviewing the status of North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism. He added that Washington was also considering other means to pressure Pyongyang and have the regime approach the U.S. on a different footing compared to past talks. North Korea was removed from the U.S.'s state sponsors of terrorism list back in 2008 under the George W. Bush administration.
This was an unscheduled appearance by the U.S. Secretary of State to address what the Trump administration believes is destabilizing and aggressive behavior on the part of Iran.
Iran is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism and is responsible for intensifying multiple conflicts and undermining U.S. interest in countries such as Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and Lebanon, and continuing to support attacks against Israel.
In 2015, the U.S., Russia, China, and EU partners agreed to lift sanctions if Iran limited its nuclear activity. But President Trump has now ordered a comprehensive review of Iran's activities to consider if sanctions against Iran should be reinstated.
If he thought everything was fine, he would have just, allowed this to move forward. I think he's doing the prudent thing by asking for a review of the current deal.
Tillerson's press conference, where he criticized Iran and said that unchecked Iran poses a threat to the world, came just hours after the similar sentiment was voiced by the chief of Pentagon, General Mattis. Let's listen.
Everywhere you look, if there's trouble in the region, you find Iran. So right now, what we're seeing is the nations in the region and others elsewhere trying to checkmate Iran and the amount of disruption, the amount of instability they can cause.
Mahmoud Ahmadinejad says U.S. President Donald Trump has chosen the path of war. The hardline former president is standing in Iran's presidential election on May the 19th. Speaking exclusively to Euronews, he described the 2015 nuclear deal Tehran signed with world powers as not clear. In my opinion, the way information was given was incorrect. The nation was not given the correct information. And then we saw what was said did not materialize. Sanctions continued. New sanctions were imposed. Some were extended. In the agreement, the capacity for legal follow-up had not been envisaged. Ahmadinejad predicts U.S. policy on Syria will lead to war and the collapse of America's global power. I think Mr. Trump chose the path of war in spite of the promises he gave his people. I've said this before and I'll say it again. This war will certainly lead to the fall of U.S. global hegemony. Iran, the US, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey. We all have to join hands to primarily work for the security, dialogue and peace of Syria. And secondly, for helping realize the will and sovereignty of the Syrian people. We have to respect Syrian sovereignty and let the people of Syria choose what they want. We should accept their choice. No one is above the people of Syria.
Britain could join America in bringing military action against the Assad government in Syria. Now, that's according to the latest statement by UK Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson. He says it will be hard to say no if Washington requests support for its strikes in Syria.
And as I said, we were not asked for specific support, but it is my belief, although I stress no such decision has yet been taken, it is my belief that were such a request to be made in future, were it to be a reasonable request in pursuit of similar objectives, then I think it would be very difficult for the United Kingdom to say no.
On Wednesday, a Pentagon agency has said that the U.S. State Department has approved the sale of over $295 million worth of military equipment to Iraq for artillery and infantry Kurdish Peshmerga units. In a statement, the Defense Security Cooperation Agency said that the equipment requested by the Iraqi government would outfit 2 Peshmerga infantry brigades and 2 support artillery battalions. Congress was notified of the approval on Tuesday. However, the agency said that the notice does not mean that the sale has been concluded.
According to U.S. defense officials, the Syrian government have moved military aircraft to a Russian base. The officials suggested that staging the Syrian jets at a Russian base will protect them from U.S. airstrikes. The maneuver began shortly after a U.S. airstrike on the Sharat air base earlier this month. That airstrike destroyed 24 Syrian jets. Now Syria is staging their aircraft at a base in Latakia in the country's northwest. The Russian military uses that base as one of their primary facilities in Syria.
What are we learning about these Russian bomber jets that approached Alaska?
Well, as you mentioned, Sandra, for the second consecutive night, Russia flew 2 long-range nuclear-capable Bear bombers off the coast of Alaska, this time coming within 36 miles of mainland Alaska, flying north of the Aleutian Islands. The 2 Tupolev 95H bombers were spotted by U.S. military radar at 9 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. local time. Unlike a similar incident Monday night, this time the U.S. Air Force did not scramble any fighter jets. Instead, it launched a single E-3 Sentry early warning aircraft known as AWACS to make sure there were only the 2 Russian bombers flying near Alaska and not flying underneath the large bombers. U.S. territorial waters extend 12 nautical miles from shore. A day earlier, these Russian jets approached Alaska's Kodiak Island. Sandra.
Turkey's president says he plans to meet with the US President Donald Trump next month. Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he's hoping for stronger ties between Turkey and the US under the Trump administration. Erdogan told Al Jazeera former US President Barack Obama deceived him over an agreement between the two to fight what he described as, quote, terrorist groups operating in Turkey.
We won, and Mr. Trump congratulated us for the referendum and the final vote. The most important point we discussed were about developments in Syria and Iraq. We plan to meet in May, and we will discuss things further face to face. The YPG is an arm of the PKK, and we must put an end to this. We can't destroy one terrorist group with another one. We are strategic partners with the U.S. Turkey needs to sit down with our partners and talk about ISIL. I also spoke to Putin. His views are not negative. He says if we talk, we will find a solution. From now on, the relations between Turkey and the U.S. will be stronger, and I hope Mr. Trump wants that too. We had a mutual agreement with President Obama in the past about the PKK, but Obama deceived us, and I don't believe that the Trump administration will do the same.
Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas yesterday let out a plea to the international community to support the Palestinian prisoners in Israeli detention who are now hunger striking. Speaking at a rally for Palestinian Prisoners Day in the West Bank, Abbas said that in denying the prisoners' demands, Israel was simply being stubborn. He called the demands just and humanitarian. The demands include installing payphones in every prison wing, the abolishment of solitary confinement, the discontinuation of administrative detention or imprisoning individuals without trial, increasing family visits to twice a month, free entry to visitors under 16 years old, removing security restrictions on visitations, more available television, and the restoration of academic studies for prisoners. The strike is being led by terrorist Marwan Barghouti, who is currently serving 5 life sentences for murdering innocent people during the Second Intifada. He's seen by the Palestinian Authority as their version of Nelson Mandela and a top political contender for president against Abbas.
Head of Prisoners Affairs of the Palestinian Authority has asked the international community to stop the dangerous situation of Palestinian prisoners. He added that if the strike goes on, it might result in the martyrdom of some of the inmates, which would mean an explosion for the Palestinians. He warned of a new intifada to emerge out of, quote, Israel's unprecedented campaign of incitement.
According to a statement from the White House on Wednesday, Donald Trump will host Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Washington, D.C. on May 3rd. Press Secretary Sean Spicer said they will use the visit to reaffirm the commitment of both the United States and Palestinian leadership to pursuing and ultimately concluding a conflict-ending settlement between the Palestinians and Israel. Even though Trump has withheld support for an independent Palestine, he has asked Israel to hold off on Jewish settlement construction in territory the Palestinians claim for their future state.
Russian ambassador to Israel Alexander Shein is expected to meet with Israeli foreign ministry officials to discuss the Kremlin's decision to recognize West Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish state. During the meeting, it's believed that Shein will also announce that Moscow recognizes East Jerusalem as the capital of a future Palestinian state, pending ongoing negotiations. Though Russia will be the first country to recognize West Jerusalem as Israel's capital, it is unlikely that the Russian embassy will be relocated from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, since the Kremlin remains committed to UN Security Council Resolution 478. Resolution 478, passed in 1980, condemns Israel's unilateral annexation of East Jerusalem and thus refuses to view the city as the capital of the Jewish state. So far, Israel has yet to formally respond to the Kremlin's decision, and the response from the Arab world has been mostly mute. This morning, Islamic State gunmen killed an Egyptian policeman and wounded 4 others outside of St. Catherine's Monastery in southern Sinai, a popular tourist destination for foreigners and Israelis alike. The Islamic State attackers opened fire from an elevated hilltop overlooking the police checkpoint located right next to the monastery. The attack comes little over a week after the Islamic State bombed 2 Coptic churches on Palm Sunday, killing 45 people and prompting the Egyptian president to declare a 3-month state of emergency. He then increased security for vital installations, including churches across Egypt. The Sinai Peninsula is a popular destination for tourists, which is just over Israel's border. But lately tourism has been waning because of increased attacks from the Islamic State.
Libya has been racked by chaos since the 2011 uprising that toppled Muammar Gaddafi, leaving rival militias and powerful politicians vying for control. Some of the worst fighting to grip Libya has played out in recent months as seesaw battles rage between rival militia and the military. The United Nations has condemned the violence, which include allegations of summary executions and mass detentions. The recent violence dates back to 2014, when Libya Dawn, a coalition of militias, captured Tripoli. Militia groups opposed to Libya Dawn consolidated around the parliament in Tobruk. This division is also reflected in the country's political makeup, with 2 rival governments, one in Tripoli and one in Tobruk. The Government of National Accord, or the GNA, was created in a United Nations brokered deal in 2015. The Tobruk parliament in eastern Libya has refused to recognize the authority of the GNA. The GNA is led by Fayez al-Sarraj, who has struggled since taking the reins to establish control over Libya. The eastern government has the support of the powerful Libyan National Army, led by military strongman Khalifa Haftar. He says the GNA does not care about the future of the country.
They were only looking out for their own interests.
The 2 governments are entangled in a violent power struggle for the country's oil facilities, airports, and military bases. The chaos has allowed al-Qaeda and Daesh to take control in some parts of the country. GNA forces recently pushed Daesh out of Sirte, which had served as the terror group's stronghold. Last week, as militias, allied with the GNA, held off Haftar's forces in a battle for an airbase, Siraj wrote an open letter to the UN, the EU, and the Arab League. In it, he asked the international community to intervene, saying the escalation in fighting is more to do with the country's deteriorating political situation than dealing with terrorism. While the United Nations Security Council meets this week to discuss the violence and instability in Libya, for many, the question is, when will it end?
A rebirth of Haiti's military. 22 years after the army was disbanded, this Corps of Engineers is the first wave of a defense force set to take over national security. UN military peacekeepers are preparing to exit after unanimous vote at the Security Council last week. For the past 13 years, they've helped to normalize the Caribbean nation faced with political upheaval. But the mission itself, known as MINUSTAH, has also been dogged by allegations of sexual abuse and blamed for a cholera outbreak after the earthquake of 2010. Now a small operation is to remain behind to train the national police, but not the military. Haitians have a complicated history with the army. The uniform is seen by many as a symbol of unbridled might, which helped secure generations of dictators.
The military were always the ones who had the responsibility of repressive behavior, repression against the opposition.
This new military is still in its infancy, hailed by some as another step towards self-reliance, but unnerving to others who fear a return to a vicious past.
At least 2 people in Venezuela have been killed in clashes on the sidelines of mass anti-government protests. A teenager was fatally shot in the head in the capital Caracas, and a woman killed in gunfire during a rally near the Colombian border. During what was referred to as the mother of all marches, scuffles between security forces and protesters broke out as the death toll rises to at least 7 lives so far this month.
Every Wednesday morning, Rio's homeless and unemployed can be seen lining up for free food at the Anjinho Feliz Center, Happy Little Angel in English. Miriam Gomez, the non-profit group founder, is struggling to get more donations for the some 200 people that knock at her door every week. With the help of volunteers, she distributes vegetables, rice, biscuits, milk powder, and all sorts of basic staple foods.
In the last year and a half or two, the demand has risen alarmingly, and I estimate 70% are people that have lost their jobs. 70%.
In Rio de Janeiro, the number of people living on the streets has nearly tripled over the last 3 years, reaching more than 14,000. And one of the reasons economists say is Brazil's deep recession that has thrown millions out of work.
Marine Le Pen has again outlined her anti-EU stance. This time she refused to give an interview next to an EU flag on a French chat show.
I want to be the president of the French Republic, not the European Commission. This is because the European Union has done great harm to our country.
Austrian Interior Minister Wolfgang Sobotka has called for the European Union to seal the Mediterranean route. His words come after 9,000 migrants were allegedly ferried from Africa during Easter weekend. The minister told local media that closing the route and securing Europe's external borders is the only way to end the tragic and senseless dying in the Mediterranean. Last year, Austria backed closing the Western Balkan route used by migrants who wanted to enter some of the wealthier nations in Europe.
The University of California at Berkeley has canceled a speech by conservative pundit Ann Coulter. The school is worried about violent protests. Berkeley made national news in February and again on Saturday when far-right and far-left demonstrators clashed in physical confrontations that led to several arrests. But Berkeley isn't the only university struggling with free speech and its potential risks. A federal judge recently overruled Auburn University's cancellation of a speech by Richard Spencer, an avowed white nationalist. Spencer gave his speech at Auburn on Tuesday. 3 people were arrested, but protests remained peaceful. Students organized an outdoor concert and protest with the hashtag Auburn Unites. Back in Berkeley, Coulter says she still plans to host her event, which the school says was organized by a student group without prior approval.
Scientists have created a Frankenstein-like molecule that may be key to fighting superbugs. Researchers at the Rockefeller University created molecules dubbed lysabodies, which are a combination of human cells, bacteria, and viruses. The lysabodies mimic a virus in the way that they identify and target bacteria cells. They essentially flag harmful pathogens so they can be recognized and attacked by the body's own immune system. In the study, researchers used the lysabodies to successfully target Staphylococcus bacteria, which can become the superbug MRSA. They said the findings, published April 17th in the journal Proceedings for the National Academy of Sciences, suggest they may have found a new tool to battle drug-resistant bacteria or superbugs. According to government health agencies, superbugs kill an estimated 25,000 people every year in Europe alone. The hybrid lysabodies are now being tested on humans to gauge their effectiveness.
Scientists at the University of California, Riverside have managed to make wasps appear even more menacing. Using CRISPR technology, which allows for characteristic manipulation via DNA and RNA tweaking, they whipped up a batch of parasitic jewel wasps that has terrifying giant red eyes instead of the typical black ones. Though doing so was the goal of the gene slicing experiment, there's a bigger picture involved. Ultimately, the team would like to perfect the use of CRISPR on very small organisms so the technology can be used to diminish the spread of diseases like malaria. While the recent red-eye wasp success shows this is a possibility, the process of making them further drove home the reality of how difficult a venture tiny specimen gene slicing is. The lead researcher noted that jewel wasp eggs are about a quarter the size of a grain of rice. You're essentially pulling a small egg out of a larger egg, injecting it with components to mutate the DNA, and then putting it back into the bigger egg to develop. He further commented, "You have to use a very, very fine needle and a microscope, and individually inject hundreds to thousands of embryos." As for what will become of the red-eye wasps, a release about the effort reveals they won't be going away anytime soon, as their red eyes will be passed down to all their offspring in the future, an important quality for researchers who are looking for a stable line of insects to study.
A deadly landslide has rocked Colombia for the second time this month, claiming at least 11 lives just weeks after more than 300 were killed in a similar disaster in Mocoa. 20 remain missing after the landslide hit several neighborhoods in Manizales, the capital of Caldas province, one of Colombia's main coffee-producing regions situated to the west of Bogota. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos said he was trying to get to the scene, but that airport closures due to bad weather had delayed his journey. He said he would make his way to the city as soon as the airports reopen. Mayor of Manizales, Octavio Cardona Leon, blamed recent heavy rains for the deadly landslide, saying the city had seen a month's average rainfall in just one night. Landslides are a common occurrence in the South American country, with its mountainous landscape, heavy rains and informal construction frequently combining with often disastrous effects.
Most of Romania is shivering under sub-zero temperatures and winds exceeding 70 kilometers per hour. It's certainly not feeling like spring right now across Central Europe, as a cold spell brings blizzards and heavy snowfall to countries including Germany, Poland, and Slovakia. In eastern Ukraine, a white coat, 30 centimeters thick in some areas, now covers the spring blossoms. In Kharkiv, the country's second largest city, the weight of the snow has pulled down trees and electric supply lines, leaving over 1,000 homes without any power and disrupting traffic. This man says, I'm 70 years old and I've never seen weather like this in April. In Switzerland, too, more than 20 centimeters of snow have fallen in 2 days, and the freezing temperatures are starting to worry farmers and wine growers alike. The cold spell could bite until the middle of next week.